But because Bertha came out and defended ACORN housing, now people think that it's ACORN, which only gives ACORN the opportunity to then turn around in 3 or 4 or 5 months from now and say to you, well, why are you attacking us? They didn't come into our offices. They came into ACORN housing offices. So I think before that there can be a really good prosecution of ACORN for what they've done and the people that they've hurt, there has to be someone who will do the research to find out what ACORN actually is. Because without that, this will continue to go on. I'm sure that somewhere in this case, which I have not read, but I did read the report by Harshbarger. We call that Harshbarger hogwash. He didn't interview any of us. And you cannot pursue this if you haven't interviewed any of us. Because ACORN 8 is made up of the 8 members that stood up in that boardroom and fought ACORN. And there were 8 of us and 400,000 of them. Those are the 8 people who make up the ACORN 8. There is no one else who was a member of the ACORN 8 at that time. We have since taken on other members to ACORN 8, but those are the original 8 members. Everyone else connected with this story is fine. But we were the people in those rooms. We know what happened in those rooms. We know the battles that we waged. We know the questions that we asked. And we're fully aware that none of them have ever been answered. And what's happening now, and we see it, and we're trying to, once again scream out and explain to people, understand what ACORN is, so that when you ask questions, those questions are precise and correct, and that you take into account that the people who built this organization were brilliant. I always say the same thing about Wade Radke. He is an organic genius. He sprung forth onto the earth, 5 IQ points brighter than everyone else, and he's been doubling it every decade since. So he loves the fact that he didn't finish college. He loves it because it gives him an advantage in the game. Thank you. I always thought that there were 12 or 15 ACORN iterations, I never knew that there were. I found out in Detroit when we were addressing Wade Radke that they had 100. And I was in a state of shock. And I was on the board, and I knew nothing about that. And then I learned later because, council sent me a list of 204 corporations. And I knew then there was something desperately wrong. And then I found out after the report came out from the Oversight Committee, is ACORN a criminal entity, that there were 361. I did not know.
Yeah. Matthew, usually public advocacy groups have a C3 arm and a C4 arm at most. Many just have one. I'm not aware of any C4s that are tax exempt that actually pay taxes. It's just kind of a contradiction in terms, but there's nothing like ACORN out there.
I really don't think there is anything even comparable to ACORN. There are some liberal community organizing networks that are big, but they're not nearly as large as ACORN, such as Saul Alinsky's group is still around, the IAF, Industrial Areas Foundation. There's PICO, which I think stands for People in Communities Organizing, or is it People Improving Communities by Organizing? Something like that. And then there's another one, DART, Direct Action Research and Training Institute. So there are a whole bunch of these things, and a lot of them are church-based. They try to get support in various religious congregations, but they're tiny compared to ACORN.
Well, Hans, one topic we didn't address much is the issue of the voter registration fraud allegations. 12 or 14 state investigations, the most active arguably in ACORN's headquarters state, or former headquarters. Now they've moved out of New Orleans, or so we're told, but down in Louisiana and Nevada, where ACORN specifically has been targeted by law enforcement. Can you give us a feel for the allegations out there and why it's important?
I will, and it's one important point to make here. I mean, Marcel got into this with ACORN because of her ideals, because of the work she wanted to do in the community. And there are lots of community organizations on both the left and the right that do terrific work. You know, I may not always agree with their politics, but none of those other organizations have engaged in this kind of wrongdoing, have violated the law like the founders of ACORN have in the way they ran it. There are lots of organizations that do voter registration drives. Again, lots of organizations on the left and the right that do this, that do it well. There's only one organization that has, in election after election, had its employees indicted and convicted for voter registration fraud. In Washington State, I think 2 years ago, ACORN actually entered into a settlement agreement with the state of Washington to avoid criminal prosecution, paid a large penalty, and agreed to set up certain rules to prevent this from happening. This is not only dangerous to our election system, but frankly, it's bad for legitimate voters who want to register and vote. Why? Well, because unfortunately, ACORN, if you mention ACORN to local election officials, they just shudder, because ACORN has this continuing habit in past elections of turning, they would go out, they would register people to vote, that is the legitimate registrations, and then they would hold on to the registrations. And oftentimes, they would turn them over to local election officials on the day that is the deadline for getting registered to vote. And so suddenly, these election officials who are trying to get ready for an upcoming election, you know, a month away, 2 weeks away, have thousands of voter registration forms dropped on them, many of which have missing information, many of which are fraudulent, and they have limited time, limited resources. They're trying to process the voter registration forms of legitimate people who want to get registered, want to vote, and they're inundated with these kind of forms. So this is dangerous for regular voters, people who want to vote in upcoming elections. And again, this is a federal violation of the law, voter registration fraud. And there was a great quote from a former ACORN employee, Nat Toller, who said, "There's no quality control on purpose, no checks and balances in the voter registration area." And this is a problem that needs to be solved. You don't have something like this happen time after time after time unless there is not just a problem with, you know, employees trying to do something wrong, but in the way they're being trained and supervised. And we also have a lot of evidence now that these are supposed to be nonpartisan activities. And in fact, there was a report done a year ago by ACORN's own lawyer, Elizabeth Kingsley, and she said that the tight relationship between Project Vote and ACORN made it impossible to document that Project Vote's money had been used in a strictly nonpartisan manner, which is illegal.
Marcel, these issues came up presumably while you were active on the board. What was it? How did you all think about it? What was discussed to the degree you're able to disclose it?
Well, you know, it isn't that I'm not disclosing when it came to Project Vote, but there was not a firewall. But to be very honest with you, normal ACORN members, we're not concerned with Project Vote for one very simple reason. We never thought that it really swayed elections. We all knew that.
What was getting back to the other issue, why is it you think you had Mr. Rathke and the others set up 200 corporations? Was it an honest effort to, you know, spread the impact around and make it ACORN opponents in terms of the legitimate public policy battles, put them at a disadvantage? Or do you think there was a nefarious motive, you know, even outside the embezzlement?